all I had to really go by is a faded photograph. It's maybe 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. It's sort of yellow, dingy, but there are people in this picture, and that picture is taken in front of my grandfather's house. And this is what I had to go by. So it's like the journey to India for me was a foreigner going to a land that shouldn't be foreign to them in search of a needle in a haystack and not knowing where this haystack was.
We actually call her grandmother Ying, which is the Chinese word for grandmother on the father's side of the family.
I call him Grandpa Foot.
We, in our native language, in Hindi, we call them Dada and Dadi.
My other grandmother would be Maman Bozorg, which is Persian for grandmother.
Muchechu means old woman in Kinyarwanda.
I called her Safta, which is a Hebrew word for grandma.
Everybody called her Mamitita.
We called her Mima and Dede.
Grandma.
Hi, I'm Steph.
And I'm Robin. Welcome to Stories from Grandparents,
the podcast where we share stories about and from grandparents.
In this episode, we have Sam, who undertook an amazing journey to India to find his grandfather's house using nothing but a faded photograph. There was a lot of themes that came out in this episode. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the themes seem to be really about, identity and connecting with yourself and your roots. And as you'll hear, Sam has, different identities, and he was trying to connect with his Indian heritage by seeking out his grandfather's home. And it was quite a journey. We hope you enjoy.
Many of us struggle with this concept of identity. I'm a British-born Canadian, parents from Fiji, grandparents and ancestors from India. Who am I? And it's always been interesting because, if you were to visibly see me, I'm Indo-Canadian and I have all the features and everything of being Indian. And it's always very common. People will come up and say, "What part of India are you from?" And I was like, "Well, I was born in England and raised in Canada." And then they're like, no, your parents, what part of India are they from? And I'm like, "They're from Fiji Islands near Australia." And they're like, "Are you Indian?" And I'm like, "Well, my grandparents or grandfathers and ancestors, they come from India." And then others will be like, "You're not Indian, you're Canadian." And I also love the response you get from people who are like, "No, really, where are you from?" So that's something that, we talk about third culture. I think I've got 4 cultures that I'm part of. And growing up, I moved from England when I was only 4 years old. So my life has really been in Canada. That's been my grounds. And, much like anything, like as Canadians, yes, we play hockey, we eat hot dogs, and when we fall down, we bleed maple syrup. That's who we are and what we are. But I struggled with this idea of identity, especially that Indian background. And I wanted to go search for my Indian background, but equally because my grandfather left India back in 1905, wound up in Fiji. My father was born there and married my mom. They moved to England, which we moved to Canada. I felt like I was really sort of distant from that cultural identity of Indian. And I, in 2004, went on a journey. I wanted to find my, sense and feeling of what it means to be Indian. But equally, nobody in my family really knew where our ancestral roots were from, where my paternal grandfather left India. So I went on this journey, and literally all I had was a faded photograph, very little information. We sort of knew the name of the village. We knew it was about 6 miles away from a town and in a district, but that was the limited information that we had, or I had. And so I went to India in search of my ancestral roots, but also to seek out my own identity. And so it was interesting because there were 2 parts to this adventure. So about the identity piece, I had a euphoric moment when I was in the northern state of Punjab. See, the thing is, growing up in Vancouver, like I said, grew up as a Canadian. And, part of it is my parents never shielded me. Like, they never said you can't be Indian. We got busy with our lives, and, you assumed your friendships. And I grew up in a predominantly, there was only maybe 7 visible minorities in my high school out of like 500 kids. So, you really never paid attention to any of those. It was only when I got to university and a much more broader global audience, that's where I met so many people from around the world, and I met a lot of people from India, and they were talking about the culture, the food, and the celebrations, and it made me feel like I was missing something. Mm. And I think the best way for me to describe my identity was my life was what we call a thali. And a thali in Indian cooking is a platter with segmented dishes. So I'm British, Indian, Canadian, and Fijian. Well, and for 11 years, I played in an Irish military pipe band as a drummer. So maybe there's some Irish chutney in there as well.
Nice.
So there's those identities, but they were always segmented and separated. But I remember waking up at 4 a.m. in Punjab, and I had this epiphany that I'm doing this all wrong. Maybe instead of a thali, which is that segmented dish, maybe I'm khichdi. And khichdi is a Indian rice dish. It's a staple, but you go to your fridge, you have the rice, and you add your vegetables and the flavors and the spices to it. But it's a blend of flavors. And that's what made me realize I'm a blend of cultures, a blend of flavors. So that's where I found my identity and a realization that I'm khichdi, not this thali. So that was part of the journey that I think I realized. The other part of the journey was to search for the grandfather's house. And it was a difficult search because the information was limited. But the interesting thing was either the pushback, or not the pushback, but the noise. Why are you searching? Why is it important? You're probably not going to find it. And, if you find it, you may not get a good reception. So why do you even want to try to find it? Why is this important?
Where was this noise coming from?
It was interesting. The noise was coming from people who either had been to India or, it was just in general. People are like, why is this important to you? And it was even the, Canadians who I talked to. Some of them obviously were encouraging, but a lot of the people who were Indian were, I guess, saying, why is this important? Why, if you find it, you may not have a good reception. And, it wasn't that they were being mean, or that, I think they were just using their own experiences of how difficult this search was going to be, But it was, I guess the best way for me is I thrive in ambiguity and uncertainty. I mean, I'm glad it wasn't an easy search, but there were setbacks along the way.
What had you heard about, did you know your grandparents? Had you ever met them?
So my paternal grandfather, I only knew him till I was 4 and I left England, because once we got to Canada, he passed away. And my grandmother, yes, she and I used to write letters to each other, and I got to know her very well. But the idea was that my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he was a quiet man, never really talked about his journey from India. And, he wound up in Fiji. Actually, what we do know is he was on his way from India, which he comes from a landlocked part of India, was on his way to Argentina because of cattle ranching, but he wound up in Fiji. And how does he wind up in Fiji? And I guess there were 3 stories that people don't know for sure, but it's either he's from a landlocked part of the world, and maybe after months of being on sea, he just said, that's it, I'm done with this. The boat landed in Fiji as a stop off, and he just said, I'm getting off here. Or maybe he saw Fiji for the beautiful paradise it is and said, I think this is where I'd like to be. Or the third option is got off the boat, thought it was Argentina, the boat left, and he's like, what, wait, this isn't Argentina? So
yeah.
That's where the journey to Fiji happened, but he never really shared, the details. My father just knows that, the name of the village was a particular name. It sat about, 6 miles from this town in this district, and that's really all we had. But my dad's older brother, he actually did go to the village. And the problem is, nobody really asked where this village was. And he passed away a number of years ago before we could get that information. India, no matter what you read or what people will tell you, you will never be prepared for what you're about to experience in India.
Yeah. Can you expand on that?
Mm-hmm. About India and about
India. Yeah, about like how it's not what you would expect.
Well, all your senses will be overwhelmed when you get to India. And I just even remember we arrived, and I remember, the airport is like any other airport. Customs and immigration, same thing. They stamp your passport, your visa, and you go collect your luggage. Everything is just very familiar to airports I had been around the world. But I remember as we were coming to the door that just opens up and now you're in India, mm-hmm. It was starting to get louder and louder and louder. And as we approached the door, it opened up and there was a sea of people there. There were 2 guardrails that kept the people to the sides as passengers were going through. But there literally was about 1,000 people there in front of us, holding placards, holding signs, people yelling to you to, try to get you to join their taxi or whatever. Now, we had a guide, and I told my wife, you look to the left, I'm going to look to the right, but we have to find our guide. Mm-hmm. But as you're walking, and we're the only ones walking down this pathway with literally 1,000 people screaming and yelling at us and saying, oh, we'll take you here and there. Again, I felt like Moses and the Red Sea parted because that guardrail separated us from all of these people. And, we stood in the doorway actually just for, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 seconds, because I think we were just overwhelmed right at that very moment. And, fortunately, then as we were walking slowly, I saw a guy holding a sign. Our name wasn't spelt correctly, but I said, I don't care. I'm going with him. Mm-hmm. And we wound up going that direction. And fortunately, it was our guide. And after that, then, you start getting to your vehicle and driving, and it's, not late at night. It's very early morning, like about, 2 in the morning or 1 in the morning. But just the traffic, the horns, the dust that's kicked up. So again, your senses are starting to be overwhelmed. You see, street hawkers cooking at that time even, and the smells, the sounds, all of that stuff captures the essence of that. But just the next morning, just the rush of all the people you were seeing and the noise of the vehicles and, all of that just really overwhelmed your senses for the first, I would say 2-3 days. Everything is just overwhelmed, and then you start getting accustomed to the traffic and the people being, all around you and, and again, the poverty where people will come up to you asking for money. They won't touch you, but they just come into that space around you. And how do you go about doing, so you keep walking and what do you say? So all of that just sort of captures it. And again, I've traveled to numerous places. Nothing compares to what India is. Now, saying that, this is why oftentimes I think with India, people will either really love it or maybe not like it. For me, I loved it. And again, eventually you got accustomed to the people and the food. The food is just truly amazing, like so flavorful. And, I was eating at the dabas, which are the roadside cafes where, the public would eat and, really flavorful foods and the scents and the smells. So all your senses just become overwhelmed. Two days before I left, that's when that picture arrived because somebody said, okay, I know that you're heading to India. This is what I have and this is what we've got. But the day before I left, my step-cousin said, well, the name of the village is something else. He said, I didn't find it, but it's something else. And went on but I was able to find something similar to it on a map. And I thought, okay, great. We've got something here. And it was like, here we go. And there was all this anticipation and this enthusiasm and excitement. I wrote about it in my journal. But the challenge was it was not the right place. And, all of a sudden you read the journal and it's always sort of, you start with this euphoric, I think we're almost there. I think we're there and this is it. And then the first house we visited, it's like, nope, it's not the place. Second house, nope, this isn't it. And but we think it's over here. And, you're going on this wild chase.
So who was with you?
Yeah, so my wife was with me. I had a driver. Mm-hmm. And when we got to that first village, it was the village elder. And he sort of, was guiding us to different places throughout this village because they were really hopeful that we could find. And they really thought, maybe this is the village. But what we realized on that first day is it wasn't the right village. And, we were actually in the wrong place. But the beautiful part of it, though, is those people who we were in the wrong village had said, look, if you can't find the village, come back tomorrow and stay with us and have dinner with us. And, they made us feel really comforting. And I thought, okay, no, if I go back the next day and I don't find this village, that's what I'm going to do. I'm coming back here. Well, I went back to my hotel. I phoned my father, who this really was important for me, is to help him find this ancestral roots. And again, I'll explain why that was important. But I really felt dejected and disappointed that I couldn't do it because I really went with this anticipation. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was really important because that photograph was literally a thin thread that separated us from the present and to the past. And if this thread breaks, there is no future with regards to finding this village. So it was important for me to do this search, but it was also important because I write about it in this book, the memoir that talks about this journey. Is my father, when I was 9, became a paraplegic, and he's done a lot for us. I wanted to do this for him, and that's why there was this urgency to find this village, because I felt like this was something I needed to do for him. Well, the next day, the driver came back and he said, well, we didn't succeed. What do you want to do? My wife thought we were going shopping, but I had another agenda. I basically said, look, instead of, wildly searching around, let's just drive to the town that's supposedly 6 miles away and talk to people. So that's what we did. We drove to this town, and sure enough, people were like, well, never heard of the name. And, I think you're in the wrong place. And, again, it was just all of this sense and feeling of disappointment that this isn't going to happen. I had comfort that I was able to find my identity, but I felt this part, it's going to be too difficult. But then this one man said, the village you're looking for, it's actually up the road 6 miles in this direction. And I remember saying, wait, did I hear you correctly? And he goes, yeah, no, the village, I've heard of it. It's up that way. So we started driving that way, but now I'm very cautious because I've already been disappointed numerous times, but I'm very cautious now. So we get to this, drive along this road, and we come to this archway, and there's this old man sitting there, and he's just staring at the ground. And we show him the picture, and he looks at the picture, and again, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way. He looks at the picture and he says, well, there's a guy in the back. He looks like so and so, but this picture is so faded. And I'm thinking to myself, no, here we go again. He says, I think I know where this house is. So he gets in our car. We drive to this house, and he walks with this photograph up to the house, and it was interesting because, I'm sort of standing back about 15, 20 feet, and people come out of the house because they're like, oh, what's going on here? And he shows them the picture. And then this woman in the picture, she basically saw this picture and she said, that's me in the picture. Who are you?
Ah, whoa.
I know. But I had to say, wait, did I hear this correctly? She goes, yeah, no, that's me in the picture. And she wanted to know who we were. And so I explained who we were. And she suddenly said, yeah, no, this is the house. Like, And it's my grandfather's brother's house.
Mm.
And I remember, we wept and we just sort of embraced. And I remember there was something she said. She says, "You're home." And all of a sudden, everything just resonated. And we captured it. And I don't know, it was just one of those moments that just all of a sudden, everything just seemed to fall into place. But it was almost like that gentleman who guided us to that house. I looked around, he was gone. And I'm like, I have no idea which direction he went. He just probably went back to his sentry position at the entrance. He had done his good deed for the day, I don't know, or the good deed for my century. But she said, "You're home," and that just really made all the difference. And then I remember then having a conversation and just really trying to fill in as many parts of that missing puzzle we had, like who were all these people? What were some of the things that they could tell me about the village and the place? But I went with determination, and I took Ziploc bags with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said, if I could find this village, I want to walk out into the fields. And what I did was I scooped up dirt and I brought back the dirt home to our family, just so that they know that they have a part of our ancestral roots with them now. So I've distributed it to various family members. I was able to now go back and tell people, fill in all these gaps of things that were missing.
Can you describe the village for us?
Yeah.
What was it like?
So I going there was all of this not really understanding or knowing what a village looks like, or, how many people there are. It turns out that there's about 1,000 people in this village. It's dusty roads, but equally at the same time, a very communal part to it. And what I write about there is, it was just this wonderful place where, many of the women were in their houses doing the laundry, cooking, and then the men were out in the fields doing the farming and everything. But then the kids were running around the village, and all the elders were sitting under a tree, sort of keeping an eye on the kids. But it's almost like there was a daycare, but it's not a daycare.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole communal living, and it was like you could almost like walk into anybody's house. And I remember we walked into one house and up the stairs to the top of the veranda, the balcony, and looked upon, and I said, "Well, whose house is this?" And they said, "Oh, it's so-and-so's house." And, and I was like, "They don't mind?" And they're like, "Oh, no, they can come to my house and I'll go to their house." But it's a very communal sort of environment. There's not this sense of belonging, the belongingness of, this is my house and, you must ask for my permission. But the belongingness is present, but the belongingness is you're part of this community.
Mm-hmm. That's such a beautiful thing, and how different from how we live. Hey, like that concept of it takes a village, and I can totally picture that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of so my husband is Italian, but he had never been to Italy, and his dad immigrated to Canada when he was 13, and he's never been back. He doesn't like to fly or travel. So a few years ago, Steve and I went to Italy, and we went to the village his dad's from, and we found the house that his dad was born in. And I kind of didn't really realize how special that would be for Steve. It was like he has this whole culture, this part of his life that he never knew. And to see, the streets that his dad walked up and down, a wall that his grandpa built, he was a bricklayer. It really added something to his identity. And so it wasn't as mysterious as a journey as yours, because we knew the name of the village. And in fact, there's still family there, and they had told the woman who lives there the day we would be there. And so we just knocked on the door, and she totally expected us, and we got to go in and see it and everything. And we FaceTimed his parents while we were there so they could see it. And his dad was like, "Oh yeah, it was like this when I was young. And, we used to have a record player there." And it was really
so
neat
cool.
for it was neat for everyone, and I think for Mike, Steve's dad, to see his son standing in this place that he's never been back to.
Yeah.
It kind of, I don't know, fit a little piece of a puzzle in Steve's heart, I think.
Yeah.
And so it reminds me a lot of that journey. But for you, there was so much more mystery and like difficulty in finding this place. Yeah. Why was it so hard? Like, people hadn't heard of the name of this village?
Yeah. Also, was this pre-internet?
Well, I think it was during the internet that I was able to do some research on it. But equally at the same time, I think the information becomes challenging in India because the records are never as accurate and the information is not as defined. What we did find out after is that the district that we originally thought it was in, which it was, they actually had almost like segmented the district into two parts because it was quite a large district, and this village had gone into the other district. So that's part of the reason why the information wasn't so correct. So the district that it originally was in is called Hoshiarpur, and it's a large district. But then at a certain point, they split the district into two, and it's called Namashahar, which means new town, and the district wound up in there, but nobody knew that it was in that other part of the area. Mm. But Robin, to your part, yours is also a beautiful story. And I get a lot of people saying, you found it and that's really great. But you know what? I will never find my roots or ancestral pieces and things like that. And I remember talking to somebody from Italy and he said, no, it's a beautiful story that you've shared. But my ancestors come from Sicily, but we have nothing to go by. And my thing to him, because he had gone to Sicily, I said, okay, but think of it this way. When you went to Sicily, was there something that just connected you to this place because you knew this is where your ancestors were from? It doesn't matter if you couldn't find the house, the village, or the town, but was there something about this place that just connected you? And he said, well, yeah, no, it did. And I said, so that is so relevant and so important. It great that I was able to find the house and family. But for you, if you felt this connection, then you've equally found something that's magnificent, and that's really important. I mean, and I think that there's a need for us to capture it. And part of the reason I say this is, unfortunately, we start thinking about this much later in life, and that information evaporates. I mean, Here I am talking to elders, and the information becomes sparse. And then they start reveling in their days of growing up, and then we're totally in a different area because what started out as tell me about my grandfather turns out to, do you remember the swimming hole we used to go hang out in? And we sort of played with this guy and then they go down their own memory lane. That's beautiful too, because they're reliving their memories and aspects. But my recommendation is for people to start earlier as opposed to later.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
So do you remember anything that they told you about your grandfather?
Yeah,
these elders that you talked to?
They said he ran away from home when he was like 18 years old, but because he had an argument with his parents, but it sounds like it was a constructed argument because my grandfather, I think, wanted to leave with his best friend. And they had already planned this, so then you create the argument and you leave the village. And part of the reason he wound up leaving is because he was the village where I met these people. It was his older brother's family, so my grandfather's older brother's family. So pretty much everything is, granted to the older son in our culture. So this is why you often see Sikhs. Join the military, join administration, venture into the world for adventures because they don't have much of a life in the village because they're the second born. So that's basically what we understood with regards to why he left.
And what kind of things would your grandfather have done for fun growing up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think he would have been running around with his friends and just sort of hanging out there. The thing with the village is people rarely would venture out and, just hang out there. So, you'd be finding whatever you could and play with whatever. There really wasn't any education at that time back in 1905. And I write about in my book how my grandfather, the story that he shared with my father and my uncles were, education is really important. My grandfather, when he, there was like a school and, you sit on the ground and you're supposed to write in the dirt. And my grandfather, after the first day of school, basically came home and said, look, they said, how's school? He said, well, we sit in the ground, we write using our finger on the dirt and that. And he said something. He said, by the time I finish with school, I may not have a finger left. And the parents basically said, that's it, no more school, because agriculture is really important. And if you don't have a finger, you're not going to be much use to us. And they basically pulled him out of school as a result.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So this was 1905 that he was born?
That's when he left.
Oh, that's when he left.
Yeah, it was probably around 1890 that he was born, or 1885, somewhere in between there. We think he was around 17 to 20 years old when he sort of bolted from the village and made his way from a landlocked part of northern India all the way down to Calcutta to hop on a steamer ship. I mean, that's the part that's missing, that I have no idea what that was like. Like, did you stow away on a train? Did you already have a plan? Did you have a ticket? How did you get on the ship? How did you know the ship was there? All of that stuff was just missing. Yeah.
And especially for like a young, uneducated person, right?
Yep.
To navigate the world in that way. It's incredible.
No, exactly. And you'll see that that's very common in our culture and our background is people will journey and either join the military, other administrations, travel the world, and seek out adventures.
And did you feel more connected to Indian culture after that?
Absolutely. I'm still what you would call a foreigner. It's really hard to say that, you are, totally absorbed into that cultural identity. But I embrace that. And
just to your point about feeling connected, when Steve was in Italy, one thing that made me realize that he had found that he was just like where he was supposed to be in life or something at that moment, as he's like terrible with directions. But when we were in Italy, like I'm talking like these windy roads, like little alleyways, shops, like no identifying features at all. And I'm completely lost. He knew exactly where we were all the time.
Wow.
It was so weird. I was like, this is usually my strength. Like navigating is usually my strength. And I was completely lost. And he was like in his homeland, man. Like he knew exactly like where to go and could navigate. And then also like he doesn't give himself a lot of credit for how much Italian he actually understands, but because he's kind of a bit too shy to try speaking Italian, but his receptive communication is excellent. So actually he was like navigating really well, and you could see that, I don't know, it was just like where he was supposed to be. He looked like so at home when we were on that journey.
Right.
Oh, that's cool.
I know that makes so much sense, and but it's also this level of confidence you gain because you're somewhere that just really makes sense, and it just resonates, and that's the wonderful part of that journey. And I'm so glad that you were both able to experience it, especially for your husband.
Yeah, it was like he was amongst his people, and he was so proud. It was so wonderful.
Yeah. It's a beautiful journey, and I made this into a memoir, which I call Lost and Found, Seeking the Past and Finding Myself, because the journey was lost and found. Everything was lost. In the process, it was found. Seeking the past, I found my ancestral roots, and finding myself, because I really started to feel more and more connected to this place. So that's the journey.
And where can listeners find this memoir?
So you can go to Amazon and even into my website. There's various links there. So, my website is sam-thiara, thiara.com, and they'll find it there. But you can go into Amazon and type my name in, or it's Lost and Found, Seeking the Past and Finding Myself. And who knows, maybe the next part of this is a screenplay.
Thank you for listening to Stories from Grandparents. If you have any interest in submitting stories, or if you want to participate on the podcast, please send us an email at storiesfromgrandparentspodcast@gmail.com.
And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It really helps us out.